Good morning. My name's Gil Gordon and I'm one of the senior advisors at RI Newcastle Lower Hunter. Today's presentation will be on this week's 2024 federal budget and the impact it's going to have on essentially financial planning world, and predominantly because of our client profile, the retiree space. I hope you enjoyed today's meeting or conversation. Let's get down to it. So I've only got about 10 slides. Forgive me for wearing a headset, but I find the audio quality is far superior when I record with a headset, so I'm going down that path. The biggest element of this week's budget was the stage 3 tax cuts. I think they've been done to death in the media. They really have little to no impact on retirees. They have a material impact on someone earning more than $150,000. Pragmatically, for the average person earning $50,000, $60,000, $70,000, honestly, I doubt anyone's really going to notice it much. Take a little bit of pressure off. It doesn't really need a lot of discussion, but the noise has already been out there in the media. So up to $4,500 a year in tax savings. The other tax measures I think that are interesting for us to look at today are the impact on retirees and the tax-free threshold. So last year, a single person retiree in Australia that was qualified for the low income tax offset or the senior Australian pensioners tax offset could earn up to about $33,000 a year tax-free. A member of a couple, about $29,780. That's been increased by about $1,500, $1,600 a year in both cases. So it's material. So if you're a retiree and a single person, $34,600 and change, and as a couple, $31,000 each. So that's around $60,000, $62,000 you could earn each without paying any income tax, which for the majority of retirees, given that most of their income tends to come from superannuation, which is normally a tax-free pension, means that most retirees pay no income tax, which is a good thing. There has been a slight indexation of the Medicare levy, which again won't affect the majority of retirees, and to be truthful, won't affect the majority of taxpayers. It's marginally better, but only very small quantum. So it 2% on the couple of $1,000 indexation will have virtually no impact on people. It's there, but it's not going to change things for you very much. Other measures I think that are particularly interesting, there's energy price relief. It's becoming quite contentious now, the cost of green energy. It's certainly in Queensland there's $1,000 tax credit, energy credit. Nationally they're giving $300 energy credit. It's going to affect every household in the country. Effectively they're taxing us and giving it back, but it's better than not having it. For small businesses, there's a similar amount coming their way. For those on rental assistance, which for the majority of retirees would be people in retirement villages, over 55 villages, there is an increase of about 10% coming in a few months' time. The reality is that will probably just justify an increase in rents that were happening anyway. So it's likely to be absorbed by the natural inflationary effect. So generally speaking, going from about $140 a fortnight to about $150 a fortnight is better than nothing, but not a huge sum in the grand scheme of things. Following America's lead, the federal government is going to give our students a little bit of relief on their help debt. That won't be a reduction in the debt, but it will be a reduction in the indexation. And again, $1,200 is not nothing. It's a very material number. So that's a good thing. They have changed the way they're being indexed now. So instead of indexing to wages growth or inflation, they're now indexing to the lower of wages growth or inflation. They're backdating it to last year. Why June 1? I don't know. Normally these things are done on 1 July, but it's June 1 for some reason. So materially, that's going to help our kids, and it's a good thing, because I think, nationally, and this is me going off on a little bit of a soapbox here, nationally, I think we're paying too high a price for education. It's a general good for society, and we've turned education in this nation into a business rather than a service. There will be, for a very small number of people that are on paid parental leave, an allowance for superannuation. Normally the way this works is you go off on paid parental leave or maternity leave, and the government will subsidise you for 6 months or so, and that gets collected and paid through the employer. So now they're giving a little bit of extra to allow superannuation to continue to receive contributions. It's not going to make a huge difference in the grand scheme of things, but it's a good thing. I'm very much a believer in the value of maternity leave. There's one of my great examples is Hungary, where in an attempt to increase the number of children that are being born naturally rather than coming in via immigration, the government in Hungary gives a 25% discount for life on tax to any woman that has a child. So up to 100% discount if you have 4 children. Now that has so many flow-on benefits to society when there are an increase in the number of children. Hungary is pretty much the only Western nation at the moment which has an increasing birth rate per person. And I'd love to see more of this kind of support for natural born children in this nation. There will be, and this is a good thing, price caps on PBS medicines. For those on a pension or concession card, it's capped at $7.70 for the next 5 years. For the rest of us, they're capping medicine at $31.60 for the next couple of years, and that's a good thing. And that goes hand in hand with the ability to get 60-day prescriptions and things, which, whilst I appreciate that the pharmacists have objected to it, I can only see as a good thing. As one who takes regular, medication, it's easier if you don't have to go in every month and get it. So I see that as a positive. From a Centrelink perspective, they've frozen the deeming rates at the current 0.25% on the first $60,000 or $100,000 and 2.25 on the upper deeming rate. I think that's pretty fair. Whilst we're at a slightly higher period of interest rates now, I think predictably interest rates will come down a touch over the next year or two. So they're not really penalising people by adjusting the deeming rate too much, which I think is a good thing. It means the majority of people are still ultimately asset tested when they're on an age pension, but I think it's a fair measure when you talk about cost of living increases and things. And again, the commentary here on rent assistance, I made that comment earlier, it's increased by 10%. The figures are improving, and it's a good thing. It's going to affect the majority of retirees. It's going to affect when you're in an over 55 village. There is, and this is quite funny, I was talking to one of our staff about this yesterday. They're going to be spending $1.8 billion to recruit more staff for Centrelink. For those of you that use our Centrelink service, it takes on average about 4 months for any update that we do on the Centrelink system to be processed at their end. There's nothing we can do about that other than chase. The truth is it's hellishly expensive to hire people in Centrelink, and I don't know how long it's going to be before they start moving down AI and things, the AI path and that sort of stuff. But it's going to have to change, because this is costing people money, and it's causing a lot of grief. So 7,500 additional staff is good. Unfortunately, a fair amount of money is going to be spent on cybersecurity. Now, for practical purposes, whilst cybersecurity, spelling mistake notwithstanding, whilst cybersecurity is a critical element, it's not something that the clients of Centrelink are going to benefit from. It just means that the media is going to have a slightly tougher job in attacking the government's cybersecurity rules. Superannuation. There has been some movement in superannuation, and this does affect people under 65. Up until 1 July this year, you're allowed to put $27,500 in and claim a tax deduction for it, either personal tax deduction or through employer contributions. that's going to be increased to $30,000. Likewise, if you don't claim a tax deduction, you can put 110,000 in, and that's increasing to 120. If you bring the 3 years forward into one, it goes from 330 to 360. Now, this is only permitted as long as your super balance is under I think it's about 1.68 million or something like that, which for them is the majority of people. There are limits to making these contributions. But what it does mean pragmatically, if someone hadn't put much into super in the last few years, you could get between now and, say, the 31st of or 1st of August this year, you could get $470,000 of contributions into super. So if you were selling a property and you were wanting to minimize capital gains tax, you could make extra contributions to super and claim a tax deduction for it up to the limits. But you could also put extra cash as a non-deductible contribution up to about $470,000 in a very short period. So if your super balance was under $500,000 at 1 July last year, you're allowed to play catch up on 5 years of contributions and claim a tax deduction for it. So in many ways, if someone was to be selling a property right now and to get the money in before 30 June, we'd be looking at potentially contributing 50, 60, 70,000 to super and claiming a tax deduction for it for some people, as well as putting $470,000 into super over the course of the next month or so. So that can make quite a substantial difference to get some money out of the taxable environment into the tax-free environment available to a superannuation pension. So this is quite a good thing, and it's, if you're in that space where you've got some spare cash, there's a really strong argument to actually having a chat with us before 30 June. Now, government co-contribution thresholds are increasing marginally. It's not going to change things very much, but it does mean for every dollar you put in, the government will put a little extra in if you're in that bracket. So that's a good thing. The superannuation guarantee charge is increasing from 11% to 11.5% next year. So that's just part of the incremental increase going to 12. Australia really has arguably the best superannuation and mandatory savings system in the world. It's given us a fantastic quality of life in retirement for the average Aussie. We're certainly seeing the account balances going up as the years go on. People are retiring with larger superannuation balances, so that's a good thing. The 11.5% is only on the first $260,000 a year in income that you earn. So it is capped, but for the majority of people, that's 11%, 11.5% across the board. For those that are working for favoured employers, such as a university or Energy Australia, they can contribute more than 11.5% and often do as a retention strategy. You are allowed to contribute extra money into the system as voluntary pre-tax contributions up to the $30,000 limit from 1 July this year. Now, a couple of good improvements in aged care. They're not huge. There's a lot of systems changes, but the honest answer is they're creating about 24,000 new home care packages. We get this interesting dichotomy in this country between aged care and NDIS. It turns out that aged care is much more regulated, and the income you can be paid for aged care service is much more regulated than NDIS. I think with the current pressure on the NDIS system, we're going to see a lot of the NDIS service providers broaden their services into the home care space for older people, and I see that as a good thing. The NDIS is, I think, universally accepted as out of control. There's simply no cap on things, and they're seeing 300%, 400%, 500% surcharges on things that you can buy from the shops for $100. So that needs to be addressed. The changes to the system, which unfortunately most people aren't going to feel, are largely regulatory. New Aged Care Act, well, okay, sure. Regulation improvement. That means they're spending $110 million on external lawyers. Additional funding for My Aged Care call centres, Well, we find a lot of people are quite overwhelmed and confused by the aged care framework. That's why they end up calling us. And obviously, it's worth saying that we provide a lot of services into that space, increasingly, actually, as the years go on, as we're dealing with our clients getting older or our clients' parents getting older. They're going to be spending a bit more to attract nurses and so forth. 87 million is actually not a lot in the grand scheme of things. They'll be replacing the ACAT and the ACAS system with a new system. No one's going to notice that. Centrelink deeming rates we've talked about, and the carers payment has got a slightly easier work test from 25 hours a week to 100 hours a month. It's immaterial for the majority of people. So that's about it in terms of things that are going to affect retirees. I'm a bit disappointed that there's nothing more interesting or sexy for the average retiree. It would appear the government's focusing elsewhere. We're certainly in a big spending government world, so I'll talk a little bit about the general budget now. There is a $9.3 billion surplus. I think we need to be completely transparent. We've got to thank iron ore and coal for that. A little bit of nickel, a little bit of tin, a little bit of uranium. The surplus is coming straight from the mining sector. Next year's deficit is starting to look a bit scary. Now, there's two reasons for that. This is a big spending government, and that's not something I'm in favour of. But also, they've got forward forecasts on the commodity prices, which are taking out some of these government levies that are being placed over coal and iron ore. So if the world continues to want coal and iron ore, being steel producing assets and energy producing assets, I don't know that those budget deficit figures are going to be accurate. We will see, but I know Treasury tends to be conservative in their forward forecasts on commodity prices. It is a big spending government. We are absolutely right now in a conflict between the traditional big government thinking, which is all about make me safe, provide me extra support, aged care, home care, Centrelink money, childcare. That's all very big government's sort of thing. We're paying as a society quite the price for the move to equal participation in the workforce by women, by mothers. It's not that it's not a good idea. I think it's hands down one of the best things that's ever happened to humanity. However, there is a price you pay where you need more support from the government for that, and then obviously houses go up and things become more expensive. So it's an interesting debate going on at the moment about big government, and all over the world we have these fairly big government thinking governments versus the traditional conservative small government. There will be a recoil back over the next 2 or 3 years. We're seeing it in Argentina right now. We're seeing it in Italy. It will depend on what happens in America at the end of the year. That'll be a movement back to small government. I don't know that we're going to see it in Australia. We may, but we probably will by the end of the next term of the federal government. And it's a question of cost cutting. That's, essentially the public services expanded phenomenally under the current crop of Labor governments, and it always does us. It's not an unusual phenomenon, but it's definitely a factor that is driving up inflation and so forth at the moment. They're predicting $1 trillion worth of government debt in 25, 26 at the current interest rate. That's around about I think it's about 40 billion in interest, which is a lot. It's a lot, and I'm not sure that even considers state government debt. They're going to make a lot of noise about this Future Made in Australia program, $22 billion. To be honest, I'm very skeptical about the value of it. That's going to focus primarily on energy, mining, and new tech. Historically, if you look back over the last 100 years all across the world, the government hasn't done particularly well out of investing in innovation. It's not where governments are strong. They're very good at human services, not so much at backing good ideas. So time will tell in that one. It's one that I could see a lot of merit in the money being devoted elsewhere. One of the things that I think I do want to draw attention to is inflation. Back during COVID, and this is a phenomenon all over the world, They printed money. They had to. They simply had to give people money to survive COVID. I'm not even going to get into the merits of COVID or government response to COVID, sorry. But it does cause inflation. You can't simply inject a few $1 trillion into the world economy without adding more assets and have it do anything other than cause inflation. So inflation itself, there's two ways to look at inflation. One is the headline figure you see in the government announcements every year or every month. That is a carefully crafted basket of inflation. They're looking to measure the cost of goods and services to everybody in Australia. So you will see things like childcare will often not be included. You will see things like aged care not included because they only relate to a small part of Australia. So we're in a space now where we're in for a period of higher inflation. At the moment, it's a touch under 4, I think, and it's heading southward. We're going to continue to see inflationary effects, and that will affect wages because as the cost of living goes up, we see pressure on wages. That will affect the price of goods because businesses provide services and people, and the cost of goods will drive the cost of living up, and away you go in the spiral. The majority of people watching this video have been there before. Don't get overly concerned about it. It's generally good for interest rates if you're an investor rather than a borrower. It's generally good for property prices, and it's generally good for the share market in the long run. Our kids, and this is a factor that's never discussed in the media, our children will inherit quite a lot of money through property. I'm still a very big believer in kids buying property and getting started on the treadmill. They simply probably won't be buying it in Merewether or near the coast. They're probably going to be buying it in Maitland or even further west. That's the way it starts. We've all got those stories about when we first bought our house, we were living off an ironing board before we could afford to buy a second-hand table. And we know our kids are buying into McMansions and buying new suites of furniture and so forth. Those old principles, and this is something I'd say to the majority of the people listening, those principles that you were raised on are going to be incredibly valuable in periods of higher inflation. The kids need to learn to not spend money on entertainment and shiny toys. There's nothing wrong with holding onto a car for 10 years. They're excellent vehicles these days. You don't need to buy a shiny new car. You don't need to buy shiny new furniture. You don't need a holiday all the time. Far better to buy a house and start paying it down. So heading towards the end on this, we'll look at immigration. This is an interesting one because it gets a lot of headline in the media, but there's some reality that needs to be looked at here. And these figures come from the Bureau of Statistics. Last year, 737,000 people came in, which is about 300,000 people more than the year before. The pre-pandemic average, though, was 515,000. And we had 2 years where a lot of people didn't come in. So whilst we have got a bit of a shock with inflation coming in at the moment, it really is playing catch up to where we thought we'd be. There were 554,000 temporary visas. Now that means they're education visas, work visas, tourist visas, etc. So, student visas, tourist visas, and skilled workers. So we only brought 50,000 people in last year that were looking for jobs in this country. Now that's not the way the media is skewing this information right now. So, you need to contrast this with the fact that 220,000 people left the country last year. Right. So it's an interesting dynamic. It's a really interesting dynamic. We are seeing a lot of people coming in. We are seeing some pressure in the housing market, but it's not like they're quadrupling the number of people coming to the country. They're still playing catch up to previous years. So there was a net inflow of about 518,000 people, which is a new personal best for this country. Don't get me wrong. But the impact of COVID for 2 or 3 years there was a phenomenal reduction in the people coming in. So that has, and this is a really interesting statistic, for every permanent immigrant that comes to this country, there are 1.1 jobs created. So for every man, woman, and child that comes in, there are jobs created by them coming in. And that's good for the economy. Now you get into this conversation about an per capita recession, and that is absolutely true. We are not producing more goods and services per person in this country, and that's something the country needs to address. We're definitely in a labor cycle right now, which is what happens after you've made a lot of money and the economy's run hot and we all become quite, capitalistic. The world tends to vote more socialist sort of thinking in, and we're in that kind of cycle right now with a very strong agenda of social good and climate policy and all those sort of things. It will swing back in time, but the immigration is not really, a Labor versus Liberal question. I do want to get onto housing though, because this is again my commentary around what the kids should be doing. This is based on the Housing Australia report. 10.7 million houses in this country in 2022. We need 12.6 million, which largely is almost, it's not quite 2 million houses need to be built in the next 11 years or so. That's and nets, when we get into that question, if we're talking about almost 2 million houses being built, that's 80,000 odd homes a year need to be built, 190 odd thousand, but we're only expecting to see 127. Now that will have, quite simply, upward pressure on costs. So house prices are going to increase because of supply and demand. It's getting more difficult to develop land because of local council rules, but we're also seeing, I'm told, upward of 40% pressure on costs of construction, and that'll be labor and materials. So all of those factors are going to basically put pressure on the housing market. Many of you will have seen the graph that I show in reviews of 100 years of inflation history. It quite simply follows. With the higher inflationary periods, you see higher property prices. Not immediately, but it does follow. So if the kids can get themselves on the treadmill, they will do well out of it. When they ultimately inherit your homes, they will do well out of it. It's a period where the net wealth is going to increase, even though the net cost of living is going to increase as well. So just a few thoughts to finish, and trying to be positive here. We are still very much the lucky country. I could spend quite a lot of time talking about the economics of America or Europe, what's going on in Asia, what's going on with China or Japan, or obviously what's happening in the Middle East. There is no other place I would rather have my children grow. There is no other country with the opportunities that we have. If your kids want to learn to go and drive tractors, they'll get jobs out in Moree. If they want to become entrepreneurs, they can start businesses online better than ever before. 18-year-old girls are seriously thinking of joining the mining sector and earning good money being truck drivers in the mines. The opportunity, and we're seeing it over and over again, women are choosing to go into professions which traditionally weren't theirs. We're in for a real shortfall, which is going to be good for the kids and the income. They need some old-fashioned discipline in terms of what they're doing with that income. But again, I'd rather be here than any other nation. So the media will continue to create many problems as possible. Don't believe everything they say. It's not that bad. It's never as good or as bad as you think. But again, this country is in good shape. Our numbers are better than any other country, really. I have my opinions on good government policy and bad government policy, but I'd rather be here than anywhere else. We're returning to higher inflationary times, but they won't be as high as the 1980s. So that's a good thing. Economists, and this is again the media, they will successfully predict 10 out of the next 3 economic downturns. Their job is to always be looking around the corner, and a certain percentage of them will see bad things, a certain percentage will see good. What we're seeing all around the world is real resilience in our economies. I'm honestly actually a bit excited about AI and about robotics. I think we're about to go into a 4th industrial revolution, which is going to see a major transformation in the workplace, but that might take 5 or 10 years to happen. But again, for my kids, I'm really phenomenally excited about the future. It's going to be a period of higher inflationary times. It's going to be a little bit more volatile, but it will be good. So look forward to increased prices across the board and good returns in your property, in your superannuation funds. Get your kids to behave well with their money and to actually become investors. buy an investment property or buy a property, get started. It's a good idea. So on that note, love the country, love you guys, love my clients. I love the business we're in. I really think this budget is a great big nothing for the majority of our clients. But again, I don't want anyone to come out of this thinking that the world's going to end. It's not. We're actually in a great place economically, albeit a little bit more inflation, but there's some upside to that as well. So from that perspective, I wish you all good well. I bid you all well. If you have any questions, please do not hesitate to give us a ring. But until then, take care. God bless.